So welcome to this HGN gathering on One Planet Development in Wales. Our speaker this evening is Marc, who is on the One Planet Council, but is also a practitioner of One Planet Development and has been so for the past 6 years. He was once an academic and gave that up for the One Planet life. He's based in Pembrokeshire National Park and has a small holding of just about 3 acres. He's raised his children on his site and is going to tell us all about the concept and how you go about doing it. And I'm sure it'll be a very interesting talk. So welcome, Marc.
Thank you. I'm just having a bit of a problem. I've got a message that's flashed up on my screen and I can't seem to get rid of it. It's telling me that the record is being recorded. It's just in the middle of my screen.
Marc, you just press got it.
Yeah, I can't find my cursor. That's the problem. Sorry about that. I will get there in a second. Yeah,
I think it's a stop share screen and then do got it and then start again.
Right. It's not allowing me to stop. Hang on.
That's it. You stopped the screen sharing.
Okay, I've got it. Sorry about that.
That's okay. These things are sent to try us.
Can you now see my screen?
No.
Oh, right. I will apologize for this, but we will get there. Now you should be able to see my screen.
Okay, I can see a very sort of truncated version. That's it.
You should see the full version very brief.
And then if you click on play. Yes, lovely.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, as you say, these things are here to try us. And we got through that one, so hopefully we'll get through any other problems that crop up during the course. Okay, I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me to speak here this evening. It's a privilege to speak to you, and I relish the opportunity to share with you some of the current findings and some of the current situations that we have in Wales with regards to One Planet development. But before I go into my talk proper, I'd just like to take a step back and take a look at the big picture. And when I say take a step back, I do mean take a step back, quite a big step back. On the screen, you can see the planet Earth from the moon, the Earthrise, if you like. Described as the pale blue dot by Carl Sagan, the astronomer, who, and to quote Carl Sagan, states that the Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. And yes, that's true. The Earth is a very small stage when we look at it through a cosmic lens. But if we look at it through a human lens, it's basically our everything. It's our home, it's our life support system, and it's the only home all of us truly have. It's the one in the One Planet development, which I'll go on to talk about during the course of this evening's talk. Sorry. So what we've got, or what we see, is that the planet Earth has had life on it for around 4 billion years. And for most of that time, biological life and the physical world kind of existed in a dynamic equilibrium, if you like. Sure, there were times when catastrophes happened and things got out of sync, but over the course of time, that balance is restored and that equilibrium between life and the physical world is maintained and is persisted. That is up until recently, or relatively recently, geologically speaking. when one species on the planet is kind of turbo boosted out, I suppose, of this equilibrium that we found ourselves in. That one species I'm talking about, obviously, is Homo sapiens, or us, human beings. The impact that human beings have had on the planet is considerable. The picture I've got up now on the screen that you can see is the UK as seen from space during the night. And as you can see, from the amount of lights highlighting the cities and the infrastructure that we've created, that we have changed the face of our planet. But not only have we changed the face of our planet, we've changed the climate of our planet. We've also changed the biodiversity and the ecological functioning of our planet to such a degree that we can now be considered as human beings as a global force. Sure, humans have achieved much. Who could knock the fact that we've done amazing things. I mean, these photos that I'm showing, or these images that I'm showing, were taken from images from space. No other species has managed to do that. We have our successes, but we also have our failures, and our successes have come at the price. Everything comes at a cost, and including these include our successes. So our ability to have changed the face of the earth and to provide us with the civilization that we've got now has come at a negative cost to our environment. We've essentially sacrificed our ecology through our need to isolate new energy sources and resources in general to build up the civilization we've got. Recently, we've come to the conclusion, or lots of people have come to the conclusion, including our leaders and governments around the world, that this can't go on for much longer. And the world is slowly waking up to the fact that we need to make drastic changes to the way we do things and the way we live. And with that little cosmic, digression, I'm going to now bring you back down to earth and welcome you to Wales. So in Wales, we've developed, or our Welsh government certainly did, about 12 years ago, a policy that could potentially help with some of those situations that I've just talked about. We need to find a way to live more in balance with the world in which we live. And one of the ways in which Welsh government decided to do that was to introduce the One Planet development policy as a means of families, people living in a more sustainable way in Wales. And that's what the subject of my talk is going to be this evening. I'm hopefully going to convince you that this policy, introduced, as I say, over 10 years ago, is a success, and it actually works. And while it may not be a total solution, it certainly has a role to play with us going forward. So before I go on, I'm just going to say a little bit about myself, although I've been introduced at the beginning, so I don't need to say much about myself, but I will talk a little bit about the organisation in which I represent. So as I say, my name is Marc Scale. I'm a member of the One Planet Council. I have been for a number of years. The One Planet Council was set up not long after the One Planet development policy was implemented. So it is around about 10 to 12 years old now. I've been a member of the One Planet Council for around about 5 years. The One Planet Council is a voluntary body. Our aim is to support One Planet developments in Wales and beyond. Our specific aims are to enable, as best we can, a broad range of exemplar One Planet development projects and show that these One Planet development projects can be inhabited by a variety of people from all different walks of life. We would like to see these sites develop over time and to become successful, and then serve as inspiration for the people of Wales and maybe even further afield, UK-wide and beyond. We also offer advice. We offer advice, but we don't get specifics. We don't focus on specific applications, but we are there to offer advice to applicants who may have specific questions regarding the policy, because the policy can be quite tricky to understand and get your head around. But we also offer advice for planners and anybody else who's really interested in seeing the policy development, or anybody who's interested in living a one planet life. We also are now involved in generating and gathering research. To my knowledge, the One Planet Council is the only organisation at the moment that's dedicated to collecting and collating OPD specific data. I know there's been a number of academics around, but they just dip their toes in. It's kind of our sole purpose, if you like, that we're focused only on OPDs. And as I said, that we are in a very good position in order to get that data. And I'll talk a little bit further about that as we go on. So a brief overview of the OPD policy. This is an outline of the talk. I will give a very brief overview of the policy, and then I'm going to go and talk about some specific highlights and try to answer the question, does OPD work in practice? And then I'll talk very briefly about some of the barriers that we face and what potential applicants face to OPD. And if OPD was to spread further afield, what kind of barriers that you're likely to encounter. But more importantly than all that, I'm here to answer your questions once I've given this talk. Feel free to ask me whatever it is you'd like to know about OPD, and I will do my best to answer them. And if I can't, I will go away, find the answers, and provide them to you at a later date. So, policy, brief overview. The context of the OPD, the One Planet Development Policy, emerged, as I say, about 12 years ago, and it emerged from the Welsh Government Sustainable Development Scheme, One Wales, One Planet. Within that scheme was stated an objective that within the lifetime of a generation, the people of Wales should only use their fair share of Earth's resources. So the planning, in order to put the OPD planning policy together, the various planning departments used two sources of pre-existing policy, that based on Planning Policy Wales and the Technical Advance Note 6 for rural development or sustainable rural development communities. And following the implementation or the policy being developed, a definition was placed, or a definition was generated, and the definition that is now considered the standard by Welsh Government is as follows. One Planet development should be a development that is, through its low impact, either enhances or does not diminish environmental qualities. And OPD should initially achieve an ecological footprint of 2.4 global hectares or less in terms of consumption, and demonstrate a clear potential over time to reach an ecological footprint of 1.88. Now, bear in mind that the UK national average is around 4 global hectares. So it's quite a significant reduction in ecological, in the ecological metric, if you like, the ecological footprint metric that's required in order for a successful OPD to take place. And as I say, 2.4 is what is required for a successful OPD, but with a trajectory to 1.88. So the ecological footprint is kind of central to everything we do in OPD. It's the metric by which an OPD success or failure is determined. And it's an all-encompassing kind of metric. It is a measure of the amount of biologically productive land, or sea land, I should say, that's required to produce the resources consumed. So everything that we need in order for us to function in this world, but also it has to consider our waste. So it has to absorb all of the emissions and whatnot that we would produce in order for us to live a sustainable way. For OPDs, we are reliant on a comprehensive spreadsheet that was produced by the Welsh Government at the time the OPD application was implemented. It's a very involved spreadsheet where you are required to input a lot of data, and out the end of this data churns it all out and churns out a value. So we have a metric then to judge the success or the failure of an OPD, and that is by utilizing this ecological footprint calculator. Okay, so OPDs exist, the OPD policy exists, but what is it actually that's required in order for an OPD to be considered a successful OPD? Well, first off, we need to consider the ecological footprint that I just talked about. So when you consider your OPD, you have 5 years basically to get your ecological footprint down from the average, whatever that would be, your ecological footprint. So we'll say around about 4. You have 5 years to get your ecological footprint down to 2.4 global hectares. But that should be a trajectory. So you should be aiming eventually over time to hit that 1.88. But in order for your OPD to be a success after 5 years, it only has to be 2.4. But that's quite an undertaking in itself. Equally important is your site must have a positive impact on biodiversity and habitats. So during your application process, you are required to undertake a rigorous ecological survey of your site before habitation. And then again, at year 5, you have to do an ecological survey. And the idea is that you should see a significant difference, and that difference should be positive with regards to ecological functioning of your site. So generally what happens is an ecologist will come in as part of your application process and produce an ecological survey and give you indications about the important habitats you've already got on site, which should be maintained or enhanced. It will give you, he or she will give you information about how you could improve that site. And then over the course of those 5 years, you should implement those suggestions or changes so that when the 5-year report comes in, there's a clear positive net gain of ecological functioning on that site. OPD policy is obviously a planning application that gives you permission to live on your land permanently. However, this has some certain caveats to it. Your home has to be zero carbon in construction and use. I won't say any more about that now because I'm going to talk a little bit about that further on in the talk. You also have to set up a land-based enterprise, and this land-based enterprise has to generate a subsidiary income that is enough to meet your minimum needs from the site. Now, the land-based enterprise, as the name suggests, has to be something that is produced on your site. So it has to be grown or reared on your site. You can do other things, like, for example, you could run courses or you could be a consultant or whatnot, but that would not constitute your primary source of income. That would only be a subsidiary source of income. You must have some land-based type of enterprise. So, for example, on my site, we produce mushrooms, which are land-based, and we are now going, and we were producing up until recently eggs and things like that, and excess food we were selling on, and certain cosmetic products. Some of our cosmetic products just require some things from the land. So, for example, we will infuse certain oils and stuff from plant material that we've produced on site that we'll incorporate into our cosmetics. But that wouldn't be a complete land-based business. We would only put a proportion of that value into our minimum needs calculator. And other things, obviously, like consultancy and things like that, would just be subsidiary incomes. They would not be that sole thing. So you must have a land-based income, a land-based business, in order to have a successful OPD. You're also required to grow at least 30% of your food on site. I'll talk a little bit more about food later on in the talk, so I won't go on about it here. You must also be self-sufficient from water. This generally is done by rainwater harvesting or spring waters, collecting water from a spring or a borehole. And likewise, you must be self-sufficient in energy production. So you must be able to produce all of your energy from the site. There's also a community engagement aspect. So you're not allowed, or you're not expected to be granted OPD permission and then you go and live away in your little OPD paradise and lock yourself away from the community. You are expected to, in some shape, way or form, engage with the community. So again, speaking from personal experience, my wife, she is a governor of both the local primary school and the local high school. We regularly go to the pub and hang out with the locals. We consider ourselves locals now. We're known around the place. We don't hide ourselves away. We try to get out there. We take part in markets and whatnot, local markets and things. So we're trying to just show ourselves that we're part of the community. We're trying to be a net positive to the community, if you like. And finally, we have to deal with all our own waste. That includes toilet waste, food waste, grey water waste, whatever waste we generate on site. We have to try our best to assimilate it on site. Obviously, things like dead batteries or certain metal things with metal in it or electronics, they can be recycled down the correct authority routes. So we can use our local authorities. We're expected to pay council tax. So we do have recycling facilities, and we use those to get rid of the small amount of that type of waste that we produce. And as I say, it is a very small amount of waste, but yeah, we are able to use those kind of facilities. But by and large, all of our waste is assimilated, I should say, on site. But I hope you can see from this list that this is quite a lot of things that need to be done, and you only have a relatively short time. 5 years seems quite a long time, but when you're actually living it, it flies by. You can run out of time quite quickly, but there's a lot to do. But as I'll show you, that is achievable. So just to go back to what I talked about a minute ago with regards to homes, this is a planning application for you to live on rural land, which is usually quite a difficult thing to do, get planning permission to live on rural land. But the OPD policy does allow this. However, the house has to have a certain, it has to follow certain rules. It has to be zero carbon in build and in use going forward. So wherever possible, you need to be using sustainable materials. And it should also, when it becomes a home, it should be heated, and the electricity used to supply it and the water should all be generated on site. So you shouldn't really be requiring anything off site. Everything should be self-contained within your site, and all of your amenities should be generated on site too. So what kind of dwelling is typically found on an OPD? Well, we can characterize them into two broad categories. The first, I'm going to call a cabin. These are my labels I associate with them. This is actually my cabin, which I'm speaking to you from now. We built this cabin, this timber frame cabin, under the Caravan Act. There's a number of advantages to doing so. For example, we're not required to follow building regs, so our house doesn't have to be signed off by a building inspector. We designed it ourselves, we built it ourselves. There are certain rules you need to follow, park home rules, but they're not as in depth as a typical build, if you like. We didn't have to employ an architect. We designed this place ourselves, and we built it with materials that probably wouldn't pass your standard building regulation inspector. So most of the materials we used to build the house, or significant amount of the materials we used, were recycled. And the end result is quite a large structure, and it's a structure that we're quite proud of, that we actually built ourselves, and it provides us with everything we could possibly need. So we're more than happy with what we've done. Forgive the grey skies and stuff, it's something I took this morning. In contrast to the other house, which has got nice blue skies, this isn't our house, but this is another type of build, and this would be the other kind of common build, if you like. And this is what I would label an eco house. I hate the label, but it's just a placeholder for this type of build, if you like. Most frequently, these are straw bale type constructions. So again, they're built with sustainable materials, straw bale and whatnot. However, they do need to be built under building regulations. So there's an additional kind of requirement and maybe an additional level of expense needed in order to get one of these through. However, you are left with quite impressive structure that, I mean, some of them are really impressive, nice looking buildings. So yeah, they're the two main choices that OPD applicants seem to go through. However, that's not the That's all there is. If you decided you wanted to live in a yurt or a cob house or an earthship type build, those are all available to you. It's just that these seem to be the most common type of build that we have at the moment. Just wanted to show you this house. This is an OPD that had permission a number of years ago. This is a passive house, or it's been certified as a passive house. In fact, this is the first off-grid passive house certified in the UK. And they believe, and they're trying to confirm this might even be the first off-grid passive house in Europe. So not only is Wales potentially leading the way with this kind of planning policy, the result of that planning policy has led potentially to Wales having the very first off-grid passive house in Europe. So again, potentially becoming world leaders in this kind of way of life. So what I've talked about up until now is kind of what an OPD is and what you can expect from an OPD and what is expected of you in order to have an OPD. What I want to talk about now is actually how you go about getting that application through and how you would go about applying for an OPD in Wales. The first thing you need to do is to produce what's called a management plan. Now, I'm sure a lot of you will have seen or come across a management plan. A management plan is a comprehensive document that you need to produce yourself as the applicant that details how you are going to meet all of the criteria that I listed in the previous but 2 slides, that long list of things. So you need to state explicitly how you are going to produce the food that you need to produce to feed yourself, what your business, your land-based business will be, what your dwelling will be, how you're going to generate your power, how you're going to get rid of your wastewater. Everything has to be detailed. So it's quite a significant document that needs to be produced. And in addition to that, as we've already mentioned too, you need to produce your ecological footprint. And as I already hinted to, you need to produce an ecological survey upon application in year 5. Now, depending where you are in the world, you will also be required, or you may also be required to produce other documents, supporting documents to get your application through. So for example, where I am based, we were required to produce a discharge document to describe how we were going to discharge our grey water, wastewater onto our land. So we had to detail precisely how we were going to treat that water and how that water was going to be processed in order to make it safe so it could be discharged onto the land. That was an additional requirement specific, it seemed, to our application that I know a number of others haven't faced. So there is, each application should be taken, you know, on its own, and certain applications will require additional things, but by and large, these 3 things constitute your application. And how that should be presented and what actually is required is all detailed and outlined in the practice guidance that was produced as the policy was implemented, well, over 12 years ago in 2012. So basically the practice guidance here is the framework for how OPDs operate. It's the Bible by which we all live by. So as I've kept saying, the OPD is about 10 years old now. What is the situation after 10 years? Well, after 10 years, there were 38 approved OPD applications. I need to update this now. There's now close to 50. We seem to have had a deluge of positive applications this year. Maybe they're playing catch up from the COVID pandemic, where there seemed to have been a bit of a lull. But yeah, we're now making progress, and we're up to 50 applicants. Now, I can't unfortunately see the key to the pie chart that I've got up there, but what this pie chart shows is the vast majority of OPD applicants at the moment are from Pembrokeshire, Carmarthenshire and Ceredigion, with, again, a significant proportion in Pembrokeshire Coast National Park. They constitute the vast majority of successful OPD applicants. And as you can see, there is a concentration of these developments located in the west of Wales. this seems to be a focal point. And as I've also said, that there's increasing number in national parks. There's none in Snowdonia at the moment, and most of the applicants, or most of the positive OPDs, seem to be based in Pembrokeshire Coast National Park. Indeed, that's where I'm based myself. As I say, I can't see the exact figure there that's in Pembrokeshire Coast National Park, but I'm aware that another 2 have been approved this year going forward. So the numbers are going up and up. But due to the light touch nature of OPD applicants, due to the light touch nature of an OPD development, they are particularly well suited for national parks. So national parks shouldn't be seen as no-go areas for OPDs. Quite the contrary, in my personal opinion. They should be seen as potential places where OPDs should be set up. So this begs the question then, is the OPD policy working? We've got a policy, there's successful OPD applicants that's in place, but is it actually working? This was a question the OPC wanted to answer itself. As I say, the OPD has been around for 10 years, and we've always had an inkling that the policy is working. You know, we talk to one another, and everybody says that it's working. But we decided in 2020 that we would actually do something about this. Welsh Government weren't producing any information. The local planning officers didn't really know. So it was left down to us for us to go out there, interact with the OPD community, to generate some data, collect some data, and then to collect that data and see where we stand. Because of the unique nature of the OPC and our close proximity to all of the OPDs in Wales, we were able to get a really good response rate to our questionnaire that we devised. So we had over 95% of OPD applicants responded. So we have a good, robust data set going forward. And we believe that because of our unique position, that it was the 95% success rate was specific because it was the OPC asking the questions rather than anybody else. My gut feeling is it wouldn't be 95% if it was the government or whatnot doing it, unless it was kind of mandated to them. But the data we generated formed the first comprehensive OPD review, the 10-year review as we call it, and it was launched September last year in the Senedd by Ellen Jones. And it is all encompassing. We tried to cover every aspect of the OPD policy. I don't know if you've read it yet, but if you haven't, there's a link down there at the bottom of the screen. And if you go to the OPC website, there's a tab at the top of the landing page where you can find a link to that review. It's written in both English and Welsh, which being Welsh, we find very important. But please take a look at it and read. There's a lot of information in there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to very briefly just pull out some of the highlights and just talk you through it, just to give you a feel for what's in the review. Hopefully it will whet your appetite and then you'll go away and read it if you already haven't. But what I'm going to focus on specifically is the food aspect, the energy aspect, and the water aspect. And as I say, it'll be very brief summary of the key findings. So food. As I said earlier on in the talk, OPDs are required to produce at least 30% of their own food on site. That's the minimum. A further 35% must be produced on site. So if you wanted to, you could grow that extra 35%. But you could also use your land-based enterprise to buy that additional food in to make a total of 65%. The remaining 35% then could be grown on site if that's what you chose to do, or it could be bought using income from any other source. So it's slightly complicated to get your head around, but essentially the minimum requirement for a successful OPD is to produce 30% of your food on site. So this graph here, or this chart here, sorry, it's not obvious straight away, but I will do my best to explain it to you. So what you're looking at here on the x-axis is the OPD year, starting from your first year on site, and it goes up till 6 years. And the key message here, the key thing to look at here is the intensity of the green. So the darker the green, the more food is being produced on site. And what it shows is that, if you remember what I said a second ago, the OPD is required to produce 30% of its food on site as a bare minimum. And as you can see, as we go across the years, that percentage of food or proportion of food is increasing to the point where OPDs are producing in excess of the 30% that they need to produce in order to satisfy their planning requirements to stay on site. Just to break this down a little bit more, 16 households that we surveyed in year 3 or beyond, when we asked them to produce a valuation of the food that was produced on site, we found that there was an average food value there of just over £3,000. So that's quite a significant amount of monetary value food-wise produced on these sites. And when we took the combined total of the food produced on sites, produced by all 36 OPD households, we found that the value was just over £67,000 worth of food. So that's quite a significant amount of food being produced. And don't forget that there's only 36 OPDs that were surveyed at this time. That number now would be significantly more. As the chart I showed you highlighted, that the vast majority of OPD households now are going well beyond the minimum needs requirement. So this sets up a clear potential here to benefit local communities. Benefit local communities with fresh, produced, locally grown, high quality food that's produced sustainably on One Planet site. So there's definitely a potential here for this to impact the community significantly. Just moving on now to energy. As I've already said, that all OBDs must produce all energy on site. And that energy is for heating, cooking, electricity, all hot water, any other requirements. The energy must be produced from renewable sources on site. Our survey showed that 97% use solar to generate their electrical needs. Some people supplement this with wind turbines, but then they're quite low in number. Surprisingly so. I expected there would be more, but the data suggests that solar seems to be much more efficient or a much more effective way of people generating their electrical needs. And 97%, again, 97% use biomass, basically short rotation coppice, primarily willow, for heating their homes and for warming up water and for cooking their food, whatnot. And then moving on quickly to water. OPDs need to provide for their water needs on site again, unless there is a more sustainable alternative. So if there was already a pre-existing water connection to your site, there's no harm in using that water connection site. The harm would come if you were expecting to dig a pipe 3 miles across land in order to get your connection from the nearest mains water supply. Obviously, that wouldn't be deemed as a suitable alternative. But typically, OPDs use a combination for their water. But primarily, rainwater harvesting constitutes 3/4 of OPD's water needs. 75% of all OPDs use rainwater in some shape, way, or form, with 40% or around about 40% using natural water sources, so springs and things like that, that's found on site. 1/4 of OPDs use boreholes, again, to generate their water or as a backup, with 22% having a mains connection. Now, of that 22%, the vast majority of them only connected to the mains because they required mains pressure in order to satisfy the building regulations for their build with regards to having a sprinkler system installed. So there was a requirement for them to have mains pressure water, and the only way they could do it was to have mains pressure. So they were kind of cajoled into having a mains connection. But if you have mains water coming into your house, you obviously have dirty water going out. All wastewater, as I've said, has to be treated on site before it's released into the environment. Most frequently, that is done through reed bed systems. So virtually all OPDs that I'm aware of have some sort of reed bed filtration system that deals with all of their grey water and other needs to process the water, so it's nice and safe for them for that water to be discharged onto site. The other advantage of this type of system, obviously, a typical house, you just flush you pour your wastewater down a pipe and off it goes to be treated. The very nature of reed beds themselves, whilst being an integral part of the system of the OPD system as a whole, you know, to treat the water and whatnot, it also becomes a valuable habitat in its own right. So what is good about OPDs is that both the infrastructure of the site, how we set up the site, can also have positive impacts, ecologically speaking, by providing new habitats. So, for example, my reed bed system that I've got now is full of frog spawn and whatnot, and it provides good habitat for insects, birds, and all sorts throughout the year. We even have reptiles, grass snakes, and things that like to obviously hunt and hang about in that area of our field. So, our reed bed system, it serves a purpose, it serves a function for us, but it also serves a much wider positive benefit in that it provides habitat that didn't exist in this location before. So detailed, summaries of the key findings, and this applies, as I said, I only just brought out a snapshot of some of the key things there that were important findings of the review. When you take the review as a whole, we go through everything, you know, that I didn't talk about. That includes community engagement, minimum needs, and all this sort of stuff. But when you take all of that information together, it quite clearly demonstrates that One Planet developments are meeting their targets as laid out to in the practice guidance and the policy, and that One Planet developments are operating within their fair share of the Earth's resources, and they all have an ecological footprint well below One Planet levels. And I'll come back to this again very briefly. And as I was kind of alluding to a second ago, that the way we've set up our OPD sites, they are having this positive environmental, ecological impact. Every OPD site that has passed 5 years, who have had that ecological survey done at 5 years, has seen a drastic improvement in biodiversity and ecological function of their sites. So ecologically, the sites are working also. But what is more important, the positives that come out of this, that the OPD policy is working, indicate that what the One Planet development policy has or is aligns very closely with current government policy or plans going forward. So the One Planet development policy aligns very closely with the government's objectives for net zero. It aligns very closely with the Future Generations Act and things like that. So going forward, the One Planet development policy will fit in tidily with government plans going forward in the future. That being said, currently, most of the OPDs that are in existence are single family dwellings. They're single family homes, which is very well and good. And we want to see more of those, but we would also like to see a greater diversity in the type of applications that we see. So for example, we would like to see different types of multi-unit development. So things like with shared infrastructure. So we'd like to see multi-unit OPDs with different families or different individuals all living on the same plot, but with a shared infrastructure. And there's a variety of different setups that we could envisage going forward. So we would like to see multi-unit options with leaseholds for people who can't afford the outgoings, you know, initially, but they maybe afford to rent something. We might just like to see OPDs that have a community benefit, where the community are much more involved with it. And what I would like to see personally, I would like to see pre-existing farm businesses take on and become OPDs and see how they go. So yes, we want to see more single family OPDs. We want to see more of these how was I put it? Single family personal type to ends, but we do want to see these diversify, and we would like to see different types of OPDs going forward. And the inklings that we've had is that this is going to be the case in the coming year. There are a number of these type of applications now being lined up, being prepared. So we will see what the future holds, and we'll see how that plays out. But I don't know if you've already thought about this, or maybe you haven't, but there seems to be an elephant in the room here, in that the OBD policy is over 10 years old. And so far, all the data that I've presented to you from the 40-ish applications suggests that there's not many of us. There's not many OPDs after 10 years. And that's challenging for us to accept, because we see, as part of the OPC, a lot of interest in OPDs. We see a lot of people wanting to do OPDs, yet why are their numbers so few? So come on now, finally, to talk about some of the barriers that we face with regards to OPD. So we talked about this a lot as part of the OPC, and some of these barriers that we face include some things we can do things about and some things that we can't do things about. So with respect to the first one here, the cost and availability of suitable land, unfortunately, we are limited to the area that we have. I mean, Wales is a relatively small place, and the land that is in Wales, not all of it is suitable for OPD. Lots of the remaining land obviously has to be earmarked for other purposes. And as OPDs become more common, it's likely to be that the price of land, because it's becoming rarer and scarcer, the price of land will increase. It's quite difficult as it is to find a suitable piece of land. Lots of applicants or potential applicants that I'm aware of now spend a lot of time searching for this piece of land. And I often get asked, where can I find land? And it's a very challenging thing to answer. I mean, it's very difficult. Land is a scarce commodity, and it's only going to become more so. It is a challenge. The other thing that puts people off, or is the potential barrier to OPDs, is the bureaucracy involved, or the paperwork involved in putting together the management plan. I can speak about this from personal experience. I initially come across the policy 8 years ago and read what was involved in order to get an application across the line. After reading what was required, I put it down and said, no chance. I just don't fancy that at all. It's too much paperwork. It seems too bureaucratic. I don't fancy it. That being said, I went on a course that was actually produced by the OPC, and they explained it to me a little bit better. And I left the course feeling as though it was something that I could do. And I did do, but it was a hell of a lot of work. And it was quite involved work, and it took a lot of time. So much so that lots of applicants require the help of a planning consultant or a specialist in OPD applicants to get the relevant information across, and to get it across in such a way that gives their application a good chance of success. There's obviously uncertainty involved in submitting a plan application. As I say, this is quite an involved process, and it takes time, and who knows if you're going to get the application passed across the line. People are very, and rightly so, cautious about this type of thing, because the transition from what I call a normal way of life, a city way of life or whatnot, to an OPD life is quite drastic. And, you know, you want people to be confident in what they're doing. And if they make that decision, uncertainty can cause a lot of heartache and grief along the way. And there's also a significant, or there can be a significant cost in the planning application. So as I said a minute ago, that some people require the help of an external consultant to get their application across the line. And obviously that can cost a lot of money. The application, the management plan, is a very detailed document. It requires a lot of work and it can be expensive to produce. On top of that, you are expected to produce, you have to pay the standard planning fees. You might have to pay, or you will have to pay for an ecologist to do your surveys. So there is a lot of cost involved, and that can be something that people are unable to bear the financial burden of. And the time taken for decision. Now, 5 years ago, or 5 or 6 years ago, when we put our application in, we were looking at a time frame of around 6 months, and that's how long it took. And we felt that was a long time. But I am aware now of applicants taking up to 2 years to go through. Now, I appreciate that we've had COVID and there's a backlog, undoubtedly a backlog, and they're playing catch up. But they're, taking 2 years, essentially being in limbo, is quite a difficult thing for some people to bear. And I think that is having an impact on people's willing to pursue the One Planet policy. Just simply the fact that it really is difficult for people to sit back and let this process take 2 years, or between 1 and 2 years, for them to get a decision either way. It's just not acceptable. We also asked the applicants, those successful applicants, how they found the application process. Now, this is a Wordle. It's a bit of a semi-quantitative kind of measure, I guess. We asked them to describe, or to provide 3 words that describe their experience of the planning process when they were doing their OPD application. The redder the words, obviously the more negative, and the larger the words, the more frequent that word was returned when we asked. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of red, orange, large lettering, and long, tedious, stressful, frustrating, slow, uncertain, anxious was kind of the dominating responses that we got. So the planning application itself, the planning process itself, it's not very pleasant. How should I put it? Diplomatic. It's not pleasant. But if you want to do it, you're left with no alternative, and you kind of have to accept that this is part and parcel of how it is. Now, that's not acceptable. And obviously, we are now looking, as the part of the OPC, how we can feed this information back to those people that have the ability to make the decisions. So we need to feed this back to the local authorities and also to Welsh Government. So what we would like to do, and what we would like to see going forward, we would like to see the Welsh Government commission and publish new statutory guidance, basically an update or a replacement of the existing OPD practice guidance that I mentioned earlier. And we would like to see this framed by the Future Wellbeing of Generations Act. And we would also like to see this based on including equality, diversity and inclusion in that, so that this planning application, this planning process is open to all. Because at the moment we feel it favours a certain demographic at the expense of, oh, well, if you haven't got financial backing behind you and you haven't got the ability to write a plan, you are not going to be able to do this on your own without help. And if you haven't got the finances to pay for that help, well, then it's not available to you. And we think that's not fair, and that has to change. We also need to make sure that Welsh Government work more closely with local authorities. There seems to be a disconnect between government and local authorities, and information that doesn't seem to go downwards or upwards. And this can be a negative, because the planners who make the decisions on these applications feel as though that they are kind of left in the lurch a little bit, left in the dark, and they're kind of having to make up decisions on the spot. Sometimes those decisions are right, sometimes the decisions are wrong. And it's now becoming more clear that because the OPD application process is quite difficult, that lots of the local authorities are having to employ consultants with a more specialist background in order to assess OPD applications. And obviously that has financial implications for the planning authorities, which are not ideal. So what we would like to see is basically just the guidance and the policy just being updated and made more clear so that it's just clarified on all counts. And building on from that, we would like to see the Welsh Government provide training for local authorities, just so they get a better handle on what is required for an OPD, for a successful OPD, so that they can assess these things much more easily. Because at the moment we feel as though, as I say, there's a disconnect between applicant, between planner, and between Welsh Government. And there's a lot lost in translation, and we could make this much more streamlined and easier process for all involved. And that's what we would like to see, and that's what the OPC would like to be part of going forward. So we've talked about Wales. One of the things that we would like to see, or the OPC would like to see, and myself in particular, I would like to see OPD spread further afield than Wales. I would like to see OPD reach into England. Whether the OPD that we have in Wales could be implemented in England, I don't know. But what I would like to see, certainly, is I'd like to see local authorities in England looking at the One Planet policy in Wales, look at the review, look at the data that we've generated as part of the OPT. The OPC, the One Planet Development Policy works. The data that we've generated shows that it works. So, as I kind of said at the beginning, we all know that we need to make these changes. Government knows they need to make changes. They don't know how they're going to make all of these changes, but things need to change. And in Wales, we are lucky that we've had the OPD policy in place for 10 years, and we've managed to get this data together. But I think the rest of the UK is lucky in the fact that we've managed to get that data together now. So we have robust data that people can use to show that these sort of things, these approaches work in practice. So I'm hopeful that local authorities in England will look at this at some point, would look at the review and see that is possible. And maybe, just maybe, certain aspects of the OPD policy could infiltrate and become standard in England. That's my hope anyway. And as part of the OPC, one of our goals is to try to facilitate that and see if that can really happen. So my final thoughts before I stop talking, and then I would happily welcome your questions, is this is a slide I put up at the beginning or early on in the presentation. And what I want to focus on here is this bit at the top. The grand scheme, if you like, of the Welsh plan for sustainable development, the One Wales, One Planet scheme, where it stated that it wanted to see within the lifetime of a generation, Wales using only its fair share of resources. Well, I don't know if Wales as a whole is quite there yet, but a certain significant proportion of Wales is actually living with their fair share of the Earth's resources. And those are the OPDs that I've just highlighted. Every one of those OPDs is living a one planet life now. And just to further emphasize that fact, this is quite a difficult graph to get your head around, but it's the last graph I'll show today. Let me just describe it very briefly. On the y-axis there, you have the ecological footprint, and running along the bottom on the X, you have the year of the OPD. On the right of the graph, you have the Welsh national average. And if you look, there's a line, a dotted line there. That's the Welsh national average. That's where the vast majority of people in Wales find themselves, there or thereabouts. Below that, you'll see the OPD requirement of 2.4 global hectares. That is what you are required to reach after 5 years in order for your OPD to be deemed a success. And what you can see here, that these green dots all represent an OPD, that all of the OPDs, bar that one outlier, are hitting the OPD requirement of 2.4 global hectares well before their year 5. But more impressively, just below the 2.4 global hectare requirement is the OPD aspiration. But as you can see from this, virtually all OPDs are hitting that aspirational target well within 3 years. They're hitting it well before their 5 years. So we're already exceeding significantly what is required of us in order for the OPD to be deemed a success. So in that regard, I hope I've demonstrated that the OPD policy works, and there's potential for this policy, or this type of policy, to be rolled out on a much larger scale. And as I said, it's not the final solution. It's not it will not solve the problem, but it'll certainly help, and it'll certainly align with other projects on a broader scale going forward. So with that in mind, thank you for listening, and I'm here now happy to take some questions that you might have.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. That was an extremely interesting talk. Lots to take on board, lots to think about. Yes, as I say, very, very interesting. We've had some comments in the chat, and I think one of our audience must be an OPD person himself, because Pete Linnell has been answering a lot of the questions as they've come in. So if I just run through them, Yolanda Watson asked about the number of OPDs, which you then covered in your talk, and Pete answered that. And I queried whether all OPDs have to be off-grid, and Pete said mostly they're off-grid, because I wondered if you could generate electricity that you put into the grid and then take out an equivalent amount when you're not generating yourself.
That's a good point. I was going to include that in my talk, and I slipped my mind at one point. Yeah, there are a small number of OPDs that are connected to the electricity grid. They, with the view of exporting excess solar in the summer when they have an abundance of some, and then in the winter, the grid then acts as their backup, if you like. And as the grid is becoming more greener, as we use renewables to power the grid, that seems to be a sensible option for certain OPDs in certain situations. As I say, my OPD, we haven't got a mains connection. The mains connection isn't an option for us, so we're completely off grid. We rely on solar and batteries for our power. And we do have a backup generator that's attached just in case we went through that time where, I don't know, 2 months of no sun, which could happen in Wales, you know, it could happen, where we might need to just preserve our batteries and look after them a little bit. So that would be an advantage, you know, at some point. That would be a disadvantage, I suppose, if we would have to burn our generator in order to preserve our batteries, whereas others could rely on the grid to perform that duty. And if the greener the grid becomes, the more sustainable, I suppose, it is. So there's always a balance to be struck.
Yes, yeah. And then Rob asked whether all OPD developments so far have been residential. He was thinking about businesses. Again, Pete replied, OPD is that you live and work on the site. But then you did touch, Mark, on the fact that you are hoping that some existing farm businesses and so on might go down the OPD route.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see exactly how this would pan out. The practice guidance in itself states that OPD should be available for these type of things, you know, these type of pre-existing. It's just to date that nobody has actually gone through that process. So we don't know the practicalities about how they would work and how they would be set up. So we're very confident that these things are going to happen now going forward in the very near future. So hopefully maybe in a year's time we can come back and report on those. It's just, yes, generally the OPD is considered a place for you to live and to work on that site, but there is no reason why a pre-existing farm type business could not be adapted and become an OPD type venture. Don't see any reason why that couldn't happen, and fingers crossed it will.
Yeah. And then is there some sort of logo so that purchasers can see that the produce is produced on an OPD site? And again, Pete mentioned the One Planet produce label.
we do have a label, and it is in use. So yes, lots of One Planet practitioners now, when they sell their produce, will use that label. If you skim through the review, there's a couple of photos in there that's got the label on some produce on a market stall for sale and things like that. So yes, it is out there, and we hopefully you'll start to see it more frequently as more and more OPDs are permitted.
Yeah. And anyone who's looking for low food miles would know that that's a guarantee of very low food miles.
Exactly.
Yes. And then Ros is speaking from personal experience, saying, having produced our food for most of my life, she's saying as she's getting older, what's the exit plan for people on an OPD, you know, if they've run it while they're younger and fitter, and then what happens when they need to take a step back from such physical work?
It's a great question, and one that's not being fully resolved at the moment. So we believe, and I certainly believe this, and I believe this, that I'm building my OPD now with a view to me retiring on my site. Obviously, as I get older and my physical abilities diminish, my plan is to set this site up so that I will take those into account. So I won't be required to be doing as much physical work as I was then. And I'm hopefully we're going to be in a position where we will be able to run down or slow down with our business. So the business aspect of the OPD will be will become less and less and less. So that will require less and less effort. But the OPD itself should be set up that it still maintains its low ecological footprint, its One Planet footprint. But there's no reason why you should not be able to retire on your site that we see it now. I've had discussions with a planning officer previously, and that was talked about, and it was kind of accepted that that would be the case, although there's nothing in writing yet to confirm that is the case. But as part of the OPC, we hope to change that in the near future.
Okay, and that ties in with a comment from David Stones, who says, how will the obligations under an OPD be enforced after the planning is approved? So couldn't somebody just use it to get planning to put a house in a rather nice spot where they wouldn't normally get planning approved?
There is always that potential, but you are required to provide documentation by a yearly progress report that you are hitting your objectives as you stated in your management plan. So you need to be showing that your OPD is still ecologically sound, has an ecologically sound footprint going forward. So you cannot just get your OPD application granted and then you think that's it. You know, you've got to continuously monitor what you're doing and provide that information to the local planning authority. And if there is a situation where you are starting to fail, I'll use the word fail, this would be picked up in your ecological footprint analysis. So you would see your ecological footprint start to increase if you weren't meeting the requirements as suspected. And if your footprint rose to a certain degree, then obviously local planners would get involved. And as part of your OPD application, you have to state that there is an exit strategy. So if you start to fail and you cannot address the failure on your site and it becomes too much, potentially your site can be deemed as failed. And in which case, then you have to dismantle your dwelling house and take that off site. So you lose your kind of privileges to live on site. Obviously, it would still be your land. You would still own the land, and maybe you could keep certain parts of the infrastructure there that you had, but you would lose your permission to live on site. So yeah, you can't get your permission and then sit back and think, I've done it now, I've got a house in the countryside. It's a continuing process of ensuring that you maintain that low ecological footprint, and you do that by reporting yearly to the local planning authority. It's kind of like a tax return.
Right.
And you're meeting and you're doing what you said you would do, and it's working.
So this has the process.
Yes, so it is inbuilt and it is integrated into your approved application that there has to be an exit strategy if your site starts to fail, or fails, I should say. And if it starts to fail, the planners will work with you. There should be a little bit of leeway. The planners should work with you to try to address those concerns and address those challenges. But if they amount and they become too much and the site does fail, then unfortunately the exit strategy kicks in and you will lose your right to live on the site.
Have there been failures?
No, not failures from the site. There's been people who have now decided that they can't do their OPD, or they've decided not to do their OPD for personal reasons, and now they're in the process of kind of winding down those things, but nobody as such has failed yet.
I could stop screen sharing, and then if people do want to just raise a hand if they've got a query, because I can see that Rob has raised his hand. I've now lost him. Rob, where have you gone? So, and I think there were just while Rob's coming back, I'll just go through a final couple of comments in the chat. The comment was that 38 or 50 over 10 years doesn't seem to be a significant number. Are there any thoughts about making the requirements less stringent?
That's I think what I would rather see would be to see clarification of the pre-existing document. I think as you can see that OPD, once you've got your head around it, it is achievable and it's doable. But the problem seems to be, for me, in the application process, and it seems to be the policy itself, the description of the policy is overly complicated and it's not explained very well. So it causes a lot of confusion. So what I would like to see, and I think this would help, would be to see a rewriting of the practice guidance, but made much more legible for people to understand, much clearer for people to read and to follow. Because I don't necessarily think that the requirements are too stringent. I just think it's the way they're explained is not ideal at the moment. And I would just like to see an improvement in how these things are explained. And I think that would make a massive difference.
Because I imagine there are people like Ros who has basically been doing her own OPD, but without sort of going through a formal process. And presumably that's what you're saying, that make the process easier, and people like her, and there may be many others, particularly I would have thought in Herefordshire, who are growing a lot of their own produce, generating their own electricity, reducing their ecological footprint. They could actually then sort of be part of the movement, and because they're doing it already, basically.
Absolutely. I mean, that would be great. I mean, see, that's what we need, isn't it? We need those people who are already kind of doing this to get on board with what we're doing.
Yeah.
And you know, it's all about knowledge sharing and self-support, isn't it? And show that this, you know, and to show that what we're doing actually achieves what we're set out to do, which is one of the frustrations for me, I guess, is that Welsh government put this policy out there, let it go into the wild, and then kind of turned their back on it. But it actually works. This should be something that, you know, that you should be singing, making a song and dance about, because it is a successful policy as far as we can tell at the moment. The data suggests that it's a very successful policy. You know, people going well beyond their ecological footprint target. You know, so it is a big problem for us why there is not more OPDs, and I think going forward we need to think about that, and hopefully with what we plan to do over the next year or two with the OPC, some of the things that we plan, that we're going to start to make inroads in that regard.
Get through some of the barriers. Yeah,
get through some of those barriers.
Because Jackie put in the chat, she was wondering how many people taking part this evening would like to see this introduced in Herefordshire. And Yolanda Watson, who's one of our councillors, said she would like to see the principles of OPD put into the emerging local plan for Herefordshire. All developments could have the ecological footprint analysis applied. and key aspects such as rainwater harvesting on all developments, including extensions, including industrial sites to minimize storm surface runoff. And I know Jackie always says there should be no naked roofs. Every roof, I mean, all these new housing developments that are going up, every one of those roofs should have solar panels on them. And, you know, because that's all space for generations.
Absolutely.
So these are things that can just be built into the local plan.
Couldn't agree more.
So Pete has just said he's got to leave. He's very much enjoyed the talk, and he has put his email for anyone who wants to contact him, because as I say, he obviously has a lot of knowledge about it. So that will be in the recording, which will be posted on the Herefordshire Green Network website. Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to raise? If you want to stick a hand up or pop a query in the chat. My one thought was, do you get criticisms from people saying, well, this is all very nice, but it's a system that, or a concept that can apply to so few people, because like you say, you have to have a certain amount of money behind you. There are quite a lot of barriers to doing this, that it's not a concept that could be broadened out to the whole population. And so it's all very nice for, if you like, middle class people to sort of play at, but not really a solution for the wider population. Is that a criticism you get?
Maybe it is. It might not be framed in that way, but yes. Well, the way I look at it and the way I see it is that I live rurally, and as I say, I live near Tenby. All of our villages around here, a young family growing up here, there's just no option for them. There's just no option for housing and stuff. But the vast majority of the people growing up in this rural area understand how the rural communities work. Lots of people have worked in rural communities and stuff. These are the people that we should be keeping, you know, in our rural communities. There's just no option for them. They have no option but to go to the towns and to the cities. They move away because there's nothing here for them. There's say being near Tenby, the amount of second homed holiday homes we've got here, it's unbelievable. It's like a ghost town in the winter. You know, One Planet development policy could potentially offer a solution for families looking to set up their own home, but doing so in a rural environment in which they were born and raised. You know, it's not fair that those people have to uproot and go because there's just simply no homes for them. Now, I think that is an untapped kind of market, if you like, for OPD. You know, we should be looking at these people and trying to make it easier for these people to get a home for themselves. And as I said, OPD, there's a number of ways you can do it. You can go down the building regs route, as I kind of said, and have that eco house, which they can be quite expensive. But you can go down the caravan route or the cabin route, which we went down, and the costs of that can be significantly less. So a number of years ago, my partner, we used to run a course called OPD on a Budget, if you like, to describe exactly how we went through the OPD application. And when we started, basically, we had no money behind us. We did it hand to mouth kind of thing. You know, if we didn't have the money to do something, we couldn't do it. We'd have to save the money or get the money somehow. So it is a potential way of people obtaining a home for their family and an income from their land, so they can stay put where they were born and bred. You know, that's important to me. It's got, this policy will fail if we don't hit those, you know, those people who haven't got the financial backing or they haven't got the ability to write a significant management plan on their own. We have to hit the people or get those people on board with us, or the policy will fail ultimately.
Yeah.
I'm passionate about that. You know, this mustn't be a niche project for people with finance and ability to write these kind of documents. It has to be open to all. And that is why one of our recommendations is that we do need to produce, you know, anything going forward now that comes from Welsh Government has to be framed with the equality diversity aspect associated with it. It has to be framed within the future of well-being. So we've got to be thinking of the future going forward. We've got to be thinking of the people we've got now, and we've got to get everybody involved. And I understand that not everybody's going to want to do OPD. It's not for everybody, but everybody should have the option. It should be an option for everybody to consider. So if it's an option to consider, and if they did decide to take the plunge, there shouldn't be those kind of socio-economic barriers in place to prevent them from doing so. You know, it should be available for everybody.
And I know you said that you brought up 3 children on your OPD, so it obviously does work for families.
Yeah, and I'm not the only one. There's plenty of OPDs out there now with children much younger than we had when we started our OPD. You know, people have had newborn babies and raised them on their OPDs. You know, it's, yeah, these OPD sites, you know, for all intents and purposes, some of them can just look like a normal house. You know, you can sit there, they've got all of the facilities as a normal house. It's just that they're done a little bit differently. If you dig a little bit deeper and you go beyond, you'll see that you know, the toilet's a little bit different, the water system's a little bit different, but by and large, you get everything you need, and it's a comfortable way of life. You know, it can be hard at times, but it's certainly doable and comfortable.
Yes, yes. Yes, we're getting more comments in the chat. Pete's come in. I think it was just going back to Yolande Watson's comments about building this into the local plan. He's saying that house builders can't be forced to build beyond the regulations, which slightly begs the questions that the regulations need changing, but I guess that's central government. Pat Gordon is talking about growing local CIC, which is setting up a community market garden and hoping that it'll be as off-grid as possible. So that's an example of someone who's doing a sort of OPD type development. Jane has come in with a question: do you expect existing farmers applying to OPD to convert to carbon negative dwellings? So,
well, these are the type of things that need to be ironed out going forward. And as I say, as things stand at the moment, there is very little guidance on how this could happen, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. And as we said, the original practice guidance, as laid out by Welsh Government, suggested these kind of OPDs should be something that could happen. The way I look at farmers and what I would like to do, or I'd like to see, for example, is that a lot of the kickback that OPDs have had with regards to from farmers, you know, local farmers in the area, is that they get quite annoyed that they've lived on their land, on their farms for all of their lives. They might have inherited this, and then they go to the planning officer and say, I'd like to build a small bungalow for my elderly relative, for example, or for my son. You know, my son, he's coming of age now, he can't afford, I want to build him a house on my, I have 200 acres or something. I want to build a house. And the farm say, this is rural land, you're not allowed to build a home here. So no. And then the next week, somebody buys a plot of land next to this farmer, submits an OPD application, gets permission to live on his land, you know, on that land. So you can see from the farmer's perspective that, you know, this stranger from wherever has come in, been granted planning permission, yet this farmer who's generations old, who's lived on this land, is being rejected. So I can understand why farmers get a little bit aggravated by that. But we always say that your OPD policy is open to you too. So the way I could see this would be, I could imagine, you know, initially the farmer saying to his son, here's 5 acres, go and put an application in, get your OPD, you can live on your site, there's your home, you can have a small business, And there you go, off you go. I can set you up. Now that's a potential, an untapped potential there that I think really could have legs going forward, mileage going forward. These same farmers, all farmers are struggling, or lots of farmers are struggling, you know. There's nothing to say a farmer with 200 acres or whatnot couldn't dedicate a small proportion of that, build a small number of One Planet development homes, have some shared infrastructure there, and rent them out to the local community. It'd be a source of income for the farmer, and it could be a home for local people. And maybe there could be an exchange where people work on the farm and whatnot. There's the whole scope of things that can be done. It's just at the moment, they're not happening. They haven't happened yet. But we'd like to see them going forward. And this is when I have conversations with the farmers and local people, that's kind of what I'd like to talk about.
Yeah. So lots of possibilities.
Lots of possibilities. Yes, very much so.
Yeah. Well, we're just about coming to the end of our time. It's been a really, really interesting talk. As I say, lots and lots to think about. It would be wonderful to see it expanded into Herefordshire.
Yeah.
Lots of people are putting in the chat, big thank you to Mark. So I'd like to say thank you to everybody for attending this evening. Really big thank you to Mark for a very interesting talk. And this has been recorded. It will be on the Herefordshire Green Network website. If you're not a member of HGN, please do sign up. It's www.hgnetwork. So have I got that right? Yes, hgnetwork.org. And I'll post in the newsletter when this has been put on the website. And our next gathering is in a month's time, which is on permaculture. And again, all the details on that will be in the newsletter. So thank you very much. And thank you to Mark for your time. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.